The Civil War era in Norway is a term used for the period in the history of Norway between 1130 to 1240. During this time a series of civil wars were fought between rival kings and pretenders to the throne. The reasons for the wars is one of the most debated topics in Norwegian medieval history. The goal of the warring parties was always to put their man on the throne, starting with the death of King Sigurd the Crusader in 1130. In the first decades of the civil wars, alliances shifted and centered on the person of a king or pretender, but eventually, towards the end of the 12th century, two rival parties emerged, known as the Birkebeiner and the Bagler. After these two parties were reconciled in 1217, a more ordered system of government centered on the king was gradually able to bring an end to the frequent risings. The failed rising of Duke Skulabadsson in 1240 was the final event of the Civil War era. Events of the Civil War era. Background: the unification of Norway into one kingdom is traditionally held to have been achieved by King Harald Fairhair at the Battle of Hafrsfjord in 872. But the process of unification took a long time to complete and consolidate. By the mid-11th century the process seems to have been completed. However, it was still not uncommon for several rulers to share the kingship. This seems to have been the common way of solving disputes in cases where two or more worthy candidates for the throne existed. The relationship between such co-rulers was often tense, but open conflict was generally averted. Clear succession laws did not exist. The main criterion for being considered a worthy candidate for the throne was to be a descendant of Harald Fairhair through the male line. Legitimate or illegitimate birth was not an issue. King Sigurd the Crusader had also shared the kingdom with his brothers, King Oystein and King Olav, but when they both died without issue, Sigurd became sole ruler and his son, Magnus, heir apparent. However, in the late 1120s a man called Harald Gillekrist arrived in Norway from Ireland, claiming to be a son of King Sigurd's father, King Magnus Barefoot. King Magnus had spent some time campaigning in Ireland, and Harald would thus be King Sigurd's half-brother. Harald proved his case through an ordeal of fire, the common way of settling such claims at the time, and King Sigurd recognized him as his brother. However, Harald had to swear an oath that he would not claim the title of king as long as Sigurd or his son was alive. Succession to Sigurd the Crusader. When Sigurd died in 1130, Harald broke his oath. Sigurd's son Magnus was proclaimed king, but Harald also claimed the royal title, and received much support. A settlement was reached whereby Magnus and Harald would both be kings and co-rulers. Peace between them lasted until 1134, when open war broke out. In 1135 Harald succeeded in defeating and capturing Magnus in Bergen. Magnus was blinded, castrated, mutilated and imprisoned in a monastery. He was thereafter known as Magnus the Blind. At about the same time Sigurd Slembe, another man from Ireland, arrived claiming to be a son of Magnus Barefoot. He claimed to have gone through an ordeal by fire in Denmark to prove his claim. Harald did not recognize him as his half-brother. In 1136, Sigurd murdered Harald in his sleep in Bergen, and had himself proclaimed king. Harald's supporters would not accept him and had Harald's two infant sons, Sigurd Munn and Inge Crouchback, named king. Sigurd Slembe liberated Magnus the Blind from his enforced monastic life and allied himself with him. The war between Sigurd Slembe and Magnus the Blind on the one side, and Harald Gill's old supporters with his young sons on the other, dragged on until 1139, when Magnus and Sigurd were defeated in Battle of Holmengrafort near Havela. Magnus was killed in the battle. Sigurd was captured and tortured to death. Harald Gill's sons. The power sharing between Sigurd Munn and Inge Crouchback functioned well as long as they were both minors. In 1142, once again, a king's son arrived in Norway from west of the North Sea. This time it was Oystein Haraldsson, a son of Harald Gille. Oystein claimed part of his father's inheritance and was given the title of king, with a third of the kingdom. The three brothers ruled together, apparently in peace, until 1155. According to the sagas, Eystein and Sigurd laid plans to depose their brother Inge and divide his share of the kingdom between him. At the urging of his mother Ingrid Ranvaldotter and the influential Lendman Gregorius Stagson, Inge decided to strike first. At a meeting among the three kings in Bergen, Sigurd was attacked and killed by Inge's men before Eystein had had time to arrive in the city. Inge and Eystein then reached a tenuous settlement, but conditions between them soon deteriorated into open warfare, ending with Eystein's capture and murder in Bohuslän in 1157. Whether or not Inge himself ordered the killing of his brother seems to have been disputed at the time. The followers of Inge's dead brothers, Eystein and Sigurd were not inclined to submit to Inge and instead chose a new pretender, Sigurd's son, Håkon the Broad-Shouldered. This development has been seen as the first sign of a new stage in the civil wars. The warring parties no longer simply sprung up around a king or pretender but stayed together after the fall of their leader and elected a new figurehead, heralding the formation of more firmly organized warring factions. A figurehead is all that Håkon could have been in 1157, as he was only 10 years old. However, his followers had him named king and continued the fight against Inge. In 1161 they succeeded in killing Inge in battle in Oslo. Magnus Erlingsson and the Church. In 1161 Inge's followers took the same course of action as Eystein's followers had 4 years earlier and elected a new figurehead rather than submit to Håkon. The choice fell upon the 5-year-old Magnus Erlingsson, the son of one of their most prominent leaders, the Lendman Erlingskakke, by his wife Kristen, daughter of King Sigurd the Crusader. Erling, with the title Jarl, became the real leader of the faction. The next year they succeeded in defeating and killing Håkon in battle at Sekken in the Romsdalsfjord. The year after that another son of Sigurd Sigurd Marcus Fuster, who had been set up as a new pretender against Magnus Erlingsson, was captured by Erlingskakke and killed in Bergen. The action of Erling and the rest of his party in electing Magnus Erlingsson as their leader was a radical one, as it broke with one of the traditional principles of who might become king. Magnus was not a king's son. He was only descended from the ancient royal line through his mother. To compensate for this shortcoming, Erling and Magnus party allied themselves with the Church and introduced a new criterion. The king should henceforth be of legitimate birth. Their old leader, Inge Crouchback, had been the only one of the sons of Harald Jarl to be legitimate, and King Magnus Erlingsson was also Erling and Kristine's legitimate son. The alliance with the Church, which had recently become better organized in Norway after the establishment of a separate Norwegian archdiocese in Nidaros in 1152, became an important asset for Erling and Magnus. In 1163 in Bergen, Magnus Erlingsson became the first Norwegian king to be crowned, aged 7. A written law of succession was also introduced which only allowed the oldest legitimate son to inherit. For the next decade or so, Magnus Erlingsson's position as king, with Erlingskakke as the real leader of the country, seemed secure. Erling ruthlessly eliminated any potential rivals to his son. He was also allied at times with King Valdemar I of Denmark, and according to one source he at one time took the Oslofjord area as a fief from him. However, the extent of his subordination to Denmark is questionable. King Sverre and the rise of the Birkebeiner. In 1174 a new faction arose in rebellion against Magnus Erlingsson. Their leader was the young Øystein Møller, a son of Øystein Haraldsson. This new faction was called the Birkebeiner, meaning birch legs, because some of them were so poor that they wound birch bark around their legs instead of proper footwear. Øystein Møller was killed by Magnus and Erling's men at the Battle of Ree in 1177. Soon after the Birkebeiner made Sverre Sigurdsson their leader. Sverre had come to Norway from the Faroe Islands and claimed to have recently discovered that he was in fact the son of King Sigurd His claim was widely disbelieved at the time. However, after taking over leadership of the Birkebeiner, he became a rallying point for everyone disgruntled with the rule of Erling Skakka and King Magnus. Some materialists among modern historians have tried to read a form of class struggle into Sverre and the Birkebeiner's fight against Erling and Magnus. However, the extent to which Sverre's men actually represented the impoverished strata of the population remains disputed. It is clear that most of the lendmen, the nobility of the time, sided with King Magnus, but Sverre also quickly won several of them over to his side. In any event, the Birkebeiner did not try to change the social order of society, they merely wanted to place themselves at its top. In 1179 Sverre won an important victory in the battle at Kalvskinnet on the outskirts of Nidaros, where Erling Skakka was killed. From that point, the Trøndelag region with Nidaros at its center became a stronghold of Sverre. King Magnus continued the fight after the death of his father and refused several offers from Sverre to divide the kingdom between him. Sverre's saga, which was written by Sverre's supporters, makes much of how popular Magnus was among the common people and how this made Sverre's fight against him all the more difficult. The war between Sverre and Magnus raged on for several years, and Magnus at one point had to seek refuge in Denmark. The Battle of Fimrite, a final naval battle during 1184 in the Sognefjord, resulted in the death of King Magnus and victory for King Sverre. Sverre was to rule Norway until 1202, but was unable to achieve long periods of peace. The Church, allied to King Magnus and Erling Skakka, remained virulent in its opposition to Sverre throughout his reign. In 1190 the Archbishop, Erik Ivarsson, fled the country, and in 1194 he received papal support to excommunicate Sverre and order the country's remaining bishops to join him in exile in Denmark, which they did. By then Sverre had been able to coerce one of his strongest opponents, Bishop Nicholas Arneson of Oslo, to crown him in Bergen in 1194. In 1198 Pope Innocent III placed Norway under interdict, although Sverre forged letters to show that his excommunication had been lifted. He in fact remained excommunicated until his death. Several pretenders arose to challenge Sverre. Among the most serious was John Kuvlung, a purported son of King Inge Crouchback. He was named king in 1185 and killed in battle in Bergen 3 years later. Sigurd Magnusson, an illegitimate son of King Magnus Erlingsson, was proclaimed to be king in 1193 at the Haugating near Tunsberg. Aged 13, Sigurd was a figurehead leader. He had the support of, among others, Harald Madadsson. His rising ended after his defeat and death at the Battle of Florvag near Askøy, an island just north of Bergen, in 1194. Rising of the Bagler in 1197. The most serious challenge to Sverre's kingdom arose. Several prominent opponents of Sverre, including Bishop Nicholas Arneson of Oslo, who was a half-brother of King Inge Crouchback, and Archbishop Erik Ivarsson, met at the marketplace of Hallor in Skane, then part of Denmark. They took a boy called Inge Magnusson, purported son of King Magnus Erlingsson, as their figurehead king. Their party was called the Bagler, from an Old Norse word meaning crozier. The war between the Bagler, with the open support of the Church, and the Birkebeiner was to last for the rest of Sverre's reign. They were not able to depose Sverre, but neither was he able to win a decisive victory against them. When Sverre died from disease in Bergen in 1202, he was the first king of Norway to die of natural causes since King Sigurd the Crusader in 1130. His last act was to advise his son and heir, Håkon Sverresson, to achieve a settlement with the Church. Håkon was taken to be the Birkebeiner's new king, and the bishops returned to Norway later the same year, releasing the country from the interdict. Deprived of most of his support, the Bagler king Inge was killed the same year. The Second Bagler War and the settlement of Kvitsøy. Håkon Sverresson appeared to have pacified the whole country, but died suddenly in 1204. His successor was the infant Guttorm, who himself died later the same year. The Birkebeiner knew of no other direct descendants of King Sverre and chose one of his nephews, Inge Bårdson, as their new king. By then a revived Bagler party had formed in Denmark, taking another son of King Magnus Erlingsson, Erling Stonewall, as their king. Helped by King Valdemar II of Denmark, they launched an invasion of Norway in 1204, taking control of the Oslofjord area. This second Bagler War lasted until 1208. When Erling Stonewall fell ill and died in 1207, he was succeeded as Bagler king by Philippus Simonsen, a nephew of King Inge Crouchback and Bishop Nicholas of Oslo, and the war continued uninterrupted. The Bagler were strongest in the Oslofjord area, while Trondelag was a stronghold of the Birkebeiner, but battles and ambushes took place throughout the country. In the end the bishops were able to negotiate a settlement between the two sides, confirmed at a meeting at Kvitsøy in 1208. The Bagler king Philippus was to remain in control of eastern Norway but renounced the title of king, leaving the Birkebeiner king Inge nominally sole ruler of the country. In the event, Philippus continued to style himself king until his death, but peace between the Bagler and Birkebeiner was preserved until 1217. Reconciliation between Bagler and Birkebeiner. In 1217 King Inge Bårdson died. The Birkebeiner, nervous at being left without a leader in case of a Bagler attack, chose the 13-year-old Håkon Håkonsson as their new king, while the Jarl Skula Bårdson was made leader of the army. Håkon Håkonsson was a posthumously born son of Håkon Sverresson, of whom the Birkebeiner had not been aware when electing Inge the king in 1204. He had arrived at King Inge's court in 1206. Skula was the brother of King Inge and had designs on the throne for himself. However, he contented himself for the time being with leadership of the army, which made him, de facto, the most powerful man of the kingdom. When the Bagler king Philippus died later the same year, Skula moved quickly. He managed to persuade the Bagler not to elect a new king of their own. Instead, they officially dissolved their party and swore fealty to Håkon Håkonsson, thus reuniting the kingdom. Discontented elements remained and a revolt in eastern Norway, led by a son of Erling Stonewall called Sigurd Ribbung, dragged on until 1227. After Sigurd died a natural death, the rest of his party gave up to their revolt. The year 1227 is sometimes considered the end of the Civil War era, but most often the term is extended to include the revolt of Skula Bårdson in 1239–40. The election of Håkon as king in 1217 seems to have been considered something of a temporary solution until a permanent arrangement could be reached, and Skula undoubtedly hoped that he would soon take over the throne. At a gathering of the most important men of the kingdom in Bergen in 1223, Skula launched his candidacy to the throne of Norway in opposition to Håkon, along with Sigurd Erlingsson Ribbung and two other pretenders. However, the meeting ended with Håkon being confirmed as king. As Håkon grew up and gradually took the reins of power into his own hands, Skula's position steadily declined. In an attempt at preserving the peace between the two, Håkon married Skula's daughter Margaret in 1225. In 1237 Skula was given the title of Duke, the first time the title was used in Norway. This was not sufficient to placate him, and in 1239 he had himself declared King of Norway and launched a war against King Håkon. His revolt was unsuccessful, and in 1240 he was killed by King Håkon's men after seeking refuge in a monastery in Nidaros. The Civil War era was at an end.